On September 11, 1939, the second week of World War II continued with mounting intensity as the German forces pushed further into Poland, consolidating their positions around Warsaw and other key areas. The situation for the Polish defenders grew increasingly dire, with the encirclement of Warsaw tightening and the pressure mounting on all fronts. Meanwhile, the Allies, particularly the United Kingdom and France, grappled with their next steps, facing growing criticism and pressure to act more decisively in the face of Nazi aggression. Globally, the war's implications began to resonate more deeply, prompting strategic recalibrations and diplomatic maneuvering as nations watched the rapid unfolding of a conflict that was beginning to reshape the world order. The German military strategy: encircling and pressuring Warsaw. By September 11th, the German Wehrmacht had nearly completed the encirclement of Warsaw, tightening its grip on the Polish capital. German forces had moved swiftly across Poland using blitzkrieg tactics, a combination of rapid, coordinated attacks by mechanized infantry, tanks, and air support, designed to overwhelm and disorient the enemy. This strategy continued to prove devastatingly effective, breaking down Polish defenses and disrupting their ability to mount a cohesive resistance. The primary focus for the Germans on this day was to close any remaining gaps around Warsaw to ensure the city was completely surrounded. With Polish forces largely isolated and unable to regroup, the Germans aimed to force a quick surrender by cutting off supplies and bombarding the city with the Luftwaffe. Reports indicated that heavy air raids targeted Warsaw's infrastructure, including railways, bridges, and supply depots, to paralyze the city's ability to defend itself or receive reinforcements. The psychological impact of the siege tactics was significant. The relentless bombings created widespread panic and fear among Warsaw's civilian population. The German High Command calculated that a combination of military pressure and psychological warfare would compel Warsaw to capitulate without a prolonged fight, thus conserving German resources for further operations. German propaganda continued to frame the invasion as a justified, defensive action, emphasizing the rapid successes of the Wehrmacht and portraying the campaign as a necessary measure to protect Germany from perceived threats. This narrative was aimed at solidifying domestic support for the war effort and maintaining high morale among the German population. Poland's struggle: the desperate defense of Warsaw. In Warsaw, the Polish defenders faced a worsening situation. The city was now nearly encircled, with German forces controlling most of the routes leading in and out. Despite the heavy bombardment and the encroaching enemy, the Polish military and civilian defenders remained resolute. Under the leadership of General Walerian Chuma and Mayor Stefan Starzyński, Warsaw prepared for a siege that would test the limits of its endurance. On September 11th, the Polish High Command, led by Marshal Edward Rydz Śmigły, continued to coordinate the defense of the capital, despite the significant challenges. Communications with other parts of Poland were increasingly difficult, and the ability to organize a cohesive defense was severely compromised by the German encirclement. Nonetheless, small pockets of Polish resistance remained active, attempting to harass the German forces and delay their advance. The humanitarian situation inside Warsaw deteriorated rapidly. Hospitals were overflowing with casualties from the ongoing bombings, and shortages of food, water, and medical supplies were becoming critical. Efforts to evacuate civilians from particularly dangerous areas were hampered by the lack of transportation and the constant threat of air attacks. The civilian population, although frightened, showed remarkable resilience, often volunteering to support the defense effort in any way possible. Mayor Starzyński continued his daily radio broadcasts, urging the citizens of Warsaw to remain calm and resolute. His speeches became a source of inspiration for many, symbolizing the spirit of resistance against overwhelming odds. He appealed to the international community for assistance, but as each day passed, it became increasingly clear that Warsaw would have to rely on its own resources to withstand the German onslaught. The Allied dilemma: growing pressure and strategic uncertainty. As the situation in Poland grew increasingly dire, the Allied powers faced mounting criticism for their perceived inaction. Both the United Kingdom and France were under pressure to provide more concrete support to their beleaguered ally and to take a more aggressive stance against Germany. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's government continued to face a complex set of strategic challenges. While there was a strong public desire to support Poland and take decisive action against Germany, the practical realities of launching an immediate offensive were daunting. The British Expeditionary Force, BEF, was still in the process of deploying to France, and there were significant logistical hurdles to overcome before a coordinated Allied response could be mounted. On September 11th, the British War Cabinet met to discuss potential options, including the possibility of air raids on German military targets. However, concerns about the readiness of the Royal Air Force, RAF, for such missions and the potential for civilian casualties led to a cautious approach. The focus remained on building up defensive capabilities and preparing for a longer-term conflict. The Royal Navy's blockade of Germany continued, with the aim of weakening the German economy and disrupting supply lines. In France, the government of Prime Minister Édouard Daladier faced similar strategic considerations. The French army remained largely defensive in its posture, fortifying the Maginot Line and preparing for a potential German offensive in the west. While some French military leaders advocated for a more aggressive approach to relieve pressure on Poland, the overall strategy remained cautious, reflecting the desire to avoid a repeat of the catastrophic losses suffered in World War I. French public opinion was increasingly divided over the best course of action. While there was widespread sympathy for Poland and a desire to support the Allied cause, there was also a strong reluctance to engage in another devastating conflict. The limited military actions in the Saar region, intended to test German defenses, had not been followed by any significant offensive, further fueling concerns about France's preparedness and resolve. International reactions, strategic realignments, and diplomatic maneuvers. The ongoing conflict in Poland and the worsening humanitarian crisis in Warsaw continued to provoke strong reactions from around the world, prompting countries to reassess their positions and strategies in light of the rapidly evolving situation. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt maintained his policy of neutrality, but the events in Poland were increasingly seen as a potential threat to global stability. On September 11th, discussions within the U.S. government focused on the possibility of providing more substantial support to the Allies, including economic and material aid. The cash-and-carry policy, which would allow belligerents to purchase arms from the U.S. provided they transported the goods themselves, gained further support as a means of aiding Britain and France while maintaining American neutrality. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin and his advisors continued to monitor the situation in Poland closely. The secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, and as German forces advanced deeper into Polish territory, the Soviet Union prepared to assert its interests in the eastern part of the country. The Red Army remained on high alert, ready to move when the time was deemed appropriate. Soviet propaganda maintained a narrative of neutrality, while preparations for potential military action were underway behind the scenes. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's regime continued to advocate for a negotiated peace, positioning Italy as a potential mediator in the conflict. On September 11th, Mussolini reiterated his proposal for an international conference to resolve the war, seeking to bolster Italy's diplomatic standing while avoiding direct involvement in the conflict. However, this offer was largely dismissed by the Western Allies, who viewed it as an attempt to weaken their resolve and buy time for the Axis powers. Other neutral nations, such as Switzerland, Sweden, and the Netherlands, continued to bolster their defenses and prepare for potential spillover from the conflict. These countries, aware of their strategic positions and vulnerabilities, sought to maintain their neutrality while preparing for potential threats from both the Axis and Allied powers. The situation was particularly tense in Belgium and the Netherlands, where fears of German invasion prompted increased military readiness and diplomatic efforts to secure guarantees of neutrality. Media coverage and global public opinion. On September 11th, media coverage around the world continued to focus on the dramatic events unfolding in Poland and the broader strategic implications of the war. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and newsreels provided updates on the military situation and the responses of the belligerent nations, shaping public perceptions and understanding of the conflict. In the United Kingdom, the BBC and major newspapers like The Times and The Daily Telegraph reported on the siege of Warsaw and the ongoing battles in Poland. Coverage emphasized the resilience of the Polish defenders and the need for national unity and readiness for a prolonged conflict. Editorials called for increased support for Poland and debated the merits of launching an offensive against Germany versus continuing a more cautious approach. In France, newspapers such as Le Figaro and Le Monde highlighted the worsening situation in Warsaw and the limited military actions in the Saar region. The French press reflected the public's growing anxiety and frustration with the government's perceived lack of decisive action. Opinion pieces called for greater coordination with the British and a more aggressive stance to support Poland, while others warned of the risks of escalating the conflict without adequate preparation. In Germany, state-controlled media continued to push the narrative of a justified war effort, emphasizing the successes of the Wehrmacht in Poland and the righteousness of Germany's actions. Propaganda outlets like Völkischer Beobachter and Der Angriff highlighted the military victories and portrayed the war as a defensive struggle against foreign aggression. The propaganda aimed to maintain public morale and support for the war effort, even as the realities of a prolonged conflict began to take shape. In the United States, newspapers such as the New York Times and the Washington Post provided extensive coverage of the events in Europe, with detailed analyses of military movements and diplomatic developments. The American press remained largely neutral but increasingly recognized the potential implications of the conflict for U.S. foreign policy and global stability. Opinion pieces explored the debate over isolationism versus engagement, reflecting the ongoing uncertainty within American society about the nation's role in the world. Strategic implications and the road ahead. The events of September 11, 1939, highlighted the rapid escalation of the conflict and the strategic dilemmas faced by all parties involved. For Poland, the day marked a critical phase in the defense of Warsaw, as the city prepared for a siege that would test its endurance and resolve. The Polish government's appeals for more substantial Allied support reflected a growing sense of desperation, as the promised assistance seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive in time to make a meaningful difference. For the United Kingdom and France, the day underscored the complexities of coalition warfare and the challenges of transitioning from peace to war. Both nations were still adjusting to the realities of a conflict that they had hoped to avoid and were grappling with the strategic uncertainties of how best to respond to German aggression. The debates over offensive versus defensive strategies, and the extent to which they could and should support Poland directly, reflected broader tensions within the Allied leadership that would continue to shape the early phases of the war. Internationally, the events of September 11th prompted further reassessments and strategic recalibrations. The United States maintained its official stance of neutrality but was increasingly aware of the potential global implications of the conflict. The Soviet Union, Italy, and other nations watched closely, each calculating how best to navigate the rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape to their advantage. Conclusion: a war deepening and global stakes rising. September 11, 1939, was a day of intensifying conflict and growing uncertainty, as the rapid German advance in Poland and the hesitant Allied response highlighted the complexities of the early days of World War II. The unfolding events revealed the challenges of coalition warfare, the limits of pre-war planning and preparation, and the unpredictable nature of a conflict that was beginning to engulf much of Europe and threaten global stability. For the nations involved, it was a time of critical decisions and strategic positioning, as they sought to navigate a war that was evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. For the people of the world, it was a time of fear, hope, and resilience, as they faced the prospect of another devastating conflict and the challenges that lay ahead. The events of September 11th set the stage for a war that would reshape the political, social, and economic landscape of the 20th century, leaving an indelible mark on history.